Let's get peppy. We need music for Let's Get Peppy. What do you reckon?
No, we don't. We absolutely don't.
This is Pep. I'm Chaz the Chadello.
I'm Dr. David Smith.
I am from the TV show Planet America, which you can watch at 8 o'clock on Friday nights on ABC News, or you can watch us on Facebook or iView.
And I am from the University of Sydney.
That's almost professional.
Yes.
We should try and replicate that in future podcasts. Okay. To kick off, I'm going to talk about something which I spoke about at length on the show, but I didn't cover everything. There's going to be some overlapping because it's, I think, the biggest issue of the next few months, and that is illegal immigration or immigration.
I strongly doubt that that is the biggest issue of the next few months, but you go for it.
That's all right. Well, I think that what's coming is not going to be good, and it's already an interesting position, and we've got 3 more months of this as far as I can see. So anyway, let me take you through it. I want to take you through from the beginning, from a few years back, actually, just give a bit of background.
Yeah.
First of all, what did Trump do? Because I don't think a lot of people actually know. They know the kids in cages. I don't think they know much else. It's actually quite technical, a lot of the stuff. The first thing that Trump did was he reduced the number of things that people could claim asylum from, like, for instance, domestic violence. He just said, nah, you can't claim asylum from that anymore.
Yep.
And a few other minor things. They reduced the standards of who could judge asylum claims because there was this backlog of like 1 million people, literally a million people waiting for immigration court. So they said, okay, less judges, more bureaucrats.
Right.
And often politicized bureaucrats.
Yes.
And that cleared a bit of a backlog, although the backlog continued to grow during the entire Trump administration.
Yes.
They hired a whole bunch of new asylum officers as judges to try and judge, to try and clear that backlog a little bit. But it did actually lead to an increase in asylum grants. People don't realize that. Under Trump, there were an increase in asylum grants. Now, that's because, especially in 2019, there are a lot more people coming.
I was going to say.
But the fact is that Trump doesn't advertise that much, but in 2019, there were 46,508 people granted asylum, which was the highest annual total since 1990.
Yes.
So they were trying to clear through the backlog, but it was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, the people who were assigned, the actual people on the ground were trying to get through the backlog. The administration was clearly trying to slow it down as much as possible.
Oh, well, they obviously were trying to stop people coming, usually by being just explicitly cruel, which is the next thing they did. They tried to discourage migrants by being pricks.
Yes.
Now, we've talked once or twice before about the kids in cages thing, about how I feel like there was an outrage, and then there were things that were logical outcomes of a bad situation, and people were conflating the two. In my view, in an opportunistic way. And so let me just be very explicit about that, because this comes back with Joe Biden. What was unavoidable was when you have people coming when you're processing people who just appear out of nowhere and they say, we're a family, and you are suspicious that they are indeed a family and not a people smuggler and just a kid that they've either paid for or are just using to get over the border, you want to vet that person to make sure they're a legit family. Kids aren't allowed to stay in the same areas that the adults stay when you keep them in detention. They are very different kinds of areas. And so when you are doing this vetting process, which can take between weeks and months, you just have to separate them unless you are going to just allow both of them into the community as an alternative to detention with ankle bracelets or something like that, which you may not want to do if you think there's a chance that person is a criminal who you're vetting them precisely to see if they are a people smuggler, right? That is how you end up separating people. Now, that is what's happening right now with Joe Biden. All right, that's happening. That happened before with Obama. That happens when you have a situation where you just can't keep adults and kids in the same areas, right? But that's not just what Trump did. That was the unavoidable bit. The avoidable bit was going out of your way to separate people, even when there was no doubt whatsoever that they were families. That was avoidable. What was also avoidable was, there were documents at the time that said they were doing it on purpose to disincentivize people coming over. They were deliberately trying to separate as many families as they possibly could. And what's definitely avoidable is not even bothering to keep track of where you're putting the parents and where you're putting the kids. So then after 2 weeks, when you vetted them and you go, okay, they belong together, you can put them back together.
Yes.
As opposed to literally 2 years later, there are still 500 to 600 kids who have not found their parents.
That's right, yeah.
Because they made such a mess of it because they didn't give us stuff.
Yes.
So I want to be very specific about what Trump did wrong versus what was unavoidable, because what's unavoidable is continuing, and it's going to continue.
Yeah. But
that's not the same thing. When people go, oh, Biden's doing the same thing, he's not doing the same thing for the reasons I just said. Okay. The next thing Trump did was remain in Mexico, which is in theory I actually don't have a big problem with. In theory, that's the idea of remain in Mexico is when you have people coming over from, say, Central America and they're applying for asylum.
Yeah.
You don't want to keep them in the jail. They're seeking asylum. So you want them to be able to work, and you want them to be able to live a normal life while they're waiting to find out. But you don't want to have a situation where there's, once they find out that they're probably not going to get asylum, where they have weeks, if not months, to skedaddle before they're deported. And that was the situation that existed before. Now, remain in Mexico, the idea is,
for a libertarian, you're really good at seeing things from the bureaucrat's eye view.
Just let me talk it through.
Yeah.
The theory is that if you process them into a third country, they never get into the country if they're not supposed to be in that country.
Right.
If they successfully attain asylum, you then bring them into that country, America, right? And if not, they can either stay in the place where the third country, or they can go back home, and you can facilitate, right? That's the theory. Now, in the reality, what they did was they basically just created a ghetto where people were getting murdered, people were getting raped, people were getting sold. They were creating more, inverted commas, disincentive, right? Where they were basically being cruel again to try and drive people away. Whereas if you did it properly, you would throw huge amounts of money at this to create a place that's actually a good place for the big, with education facilities for the kids and all the rest of it, so that they can actually live a normal life. And you would throw huge amounts of money into processing them fast, so they don't have to. So they don't set down roots in a irrelevant country.
Yeah.
Right now, but they didn't want to do that.
No.
And so anyway, and then in fact I should get that in a sec. And they also had safe third country agreements, which is a similar kind of idea, getting processed in the third country. But they didn't pick safe third countries. They picked the other countries where people were trying to escape.
Yeah.
Like they picked Guatemala for Honduras.
Yeah.
And so on. And these are all shitty countries. They have hurricanes, and they have crime, and they have all the rest of it, all the things that you flee from, and drug cartels and all the rest of it. So the people are no better off in the inverted commas safe third country.
Yes. For those of you not familiar with this, a lot of the major cities in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras have war zone level homicide rates.
Yes.
A lot of cities in northern Mexico also have war zone level homicide rates.
For a large part of the last 4 years, they have been the three most crime-prone countries in the world.
Yeah.
Like not 1, 2, and 3. Anyway, but then, as bad as all that was, they then brought in Title 42. And Title 42 is a COVID protection title.
Right.
Which says because of public health reasons, you don't have to let anyone in, no matter what they, whether they deserve asylum or not. And so they just stopped processing all these people. Remain in Mexico, 28,000 people were just staying in this hellhole, not being processed.
Yes.
They stayed there for a year.
Yeah.
See you later. We don't care.
Yeah.
Of course, that's in terrible bad faith, because you can just COVID test them to see if they have COVID. You don't need to say, oh, we're not accepting anyone on the off chance they have COVID.
Yeah.
There are these little things called tests.
Yes.
Right? They take a minute.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but anyway, so then with Title 42, they just froze everything. That was 2020.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was the situation with Trump. By the way, even with that, numbers were going up with people trying to cross the border for the whole second half of last year.
Yes.
Like they went from 17,000 up to 75,000.
Yes. If you look at the spikes, it's remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is a demonstration of the fact that push factors are far more serious in terms of the numbers. They're far more determining factors in terms of the numbers than government policy.
Well, my view is that push factors and pull factors are both real, and sometimes depending on the situation, the push factors are more powerful. Sometimes the pull factors are more powerful. It just depends on the situation.
Yeah.
But you just need to but anyway. Okay, so that was the Trump situation. And by the way, the biggest spike by a mile for the last 2 decades was 2019 under Trump. While all this shit was happening.
Yeah.
Okay. That's definitely push factors. Okay, now, then there was a bunch of changes that occurred that had nothing to do with either Biden or Trump, which people are ignoring.
Yes.
First of all, Mexico changed their law.
Yes,
this is very important.
Yep.
They no longer accept kids in detention.
Yes.
So they weren't accepting families anymore with children under 6.
Yes.
And they were no longer accepting unaccompanied kids either.
Yeah.
So Trump... Even if Trump had continued, he would have had nowhere to put those people that he wanted to send to Mexico. Mexico legalized marijuana, which means the cartels, who until then were making a lot of drug money, all of a sudden their number one source of income was people smuggling.
Yes.
And so they became that much more determined to smuggle people.
Yes.
They're a pretty hardy foe, the cartels. Okay. Also, COVID became a bigger problem in Central America than almost anywhere else in the world.
Yep.
And it's still a big problem in Central America, much less than it is in America at the moment.
Yep.
And they don't have a vaccine there. And the US economy started to come back. The Central American economy definitely not coming back.
Yep.
Okay, so that's all happening as well. And so advocates were predicting that this year there was going to be a spike, no matter who was in power and no matter what they did, because of the push factors they usually
By the way, natural disasters we also need to mention.
2 hurricanes as well.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
And in fact, I would argue that those surges are still coming.
Yeah.
Because the American economy hasn't kicked off yet. It's going to.
No, absolutely.
And they'll be COVID free in another 3 or 4 months. And this is one of the reasons I say I think it's going to be
COVID free in 3 or 4 months.
Well,
that's an optimistic prediction.
Largely, I think. I mean, there'll be like 1,000 cases a day or whatever. But I think they're going to reach herd immunity by May. Let's put it that way. Okay, we'll see.
Does anyone want to take the other side of that bet against Chase?
You're welcome to. So, okay.
Well, we'll come back to that.
Yeah, we can come back to that. We do have a COVID section. You can bring that up. Okay. What did Biden do? I'm just trying to race through this. Rapidly.
Yeah.
So what did Biden do exactly? Because there's a lot of bullshit about what Biden did. Okay. First thing he did was he tightened up who ICE could arrest.
Right.
Like ICE were arresting everyone willy-nilly. Remember Trump? He said that that basically they can only arrest people who have actually committed genuine crimes. Yes. Right. And so those booked into civil immigrant detention fell from 5,119 in January to 1,900 in February.
Right, yes. So the days of ICE agents hanging out in church parking lots,
and outside courts as well.
Yes, are gone.
So now that, by the way, while worth noting, is completely irrelevant to the issue of the border. This is what's going on inside America, not on the border. So let's not conflate that with what we're about to talk about. Yes. Because people are conflating it.
Okay.
He stopped building the wall, which, that's a big impact because Trump had built 12 kilometers of wall up to that point in 4 years. So the wall stopped being, there stopped being 12
When was the last time you built 12 kilometers of anything?
Yeah, that's
you built 12 kilometers of bullshit.
Sorry
about that. This is,
that's our listeners.
I try to see things from the point of view of other people.
It's very tolerant.
Yes.
Look, I do build 12 kilometers. I build 12 kilometers of empty La Croix cans.
Oh, is there anything more elitist than that?
Anyway, but yeah, people saying, and they're all saying, he stopped building the wall. No, zero difference in the first month of an administration where the previous administration basically built nothing.
Yeah.
He did start processing the remaining Mexico people, which was nice of him.
Yes.
They processed 1,500 of them in the last month.
Yes.
Okay. He kept Title 42. This does not get mentioned enough.
Yes.
There are still people being turned away for absolutely no reason under the premise of COVID when they don't have COVID.
Yeah, no, that's ridiculous.
72% of the people last month were turned away by Title 42.
That is ridiculous.
The only people, in fact, he hasn't turned away from with Title 42 are the young kids and the families with young kids that he can't send back because Mexico won't let him. So let's be very clear what's going on. All the generosity of the Biden administration is just doing what Mexico is forcing him to do.
Yes.
Okay. He's not saying that. They're not saying that. Everyone's not saying that, but it's true.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just say, Biden is proving to be far better at both claiming credit and avoiding blame than I ever would have suggested. He is a cunning old politician.
He is. He's a canny operator.
Like, yeah, I wouldn't have guessed it, but he so far has proven to be very, very good at both taking dubious credit and avoiding blame. Well,
he's proven he's not senile, at the very least, from that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, here's where we talk about push versus pull factors, because even though it's not Biden's choice, he's got to take the kids.
Yes.
This is a pull factor, and the proof is in the numbers, which is there were 47 new kids arriving per day in early January. Then there were 203 arriving per day in late January.
Yeah.
Then there were 321 arriving per day.
When Chaz says 47 new kids, that's 47 new arrivals. There weren't 47 members of new kids on the block.
That's true. Just imagine if there were. That would be a real crisis.
Hanging tough at the border. Yeah.
And there were 565 kids arriving over the border per day last week.
Yes.
So, like when you're talking almost 10 times as much, there's clearly something going on there. Right?
Yeah.
And he continued to do what both he and Trump had done, the separating the kids thing when you're vetting them and all the rest of it, which I'm not blaming him for, but it does make his tweet back in 2019 a bit awkward when he said, 1 year ago, this administration began ripping apart immigrant families, putting children in cages. As I told X and other brave activists, we can fix our broken immigration system without tossing aside our values. Well, you can't yet, Biden, because you're doing exactly the same thing. Not that I blame you, because that is a tough
And also,
situation.
no one ever expects any politician to keep a promise to immigrants.
Fair, but sad.
Yeah.
Okay, and so Biden at the moment is telling people to go home. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. I tell you, he went on TV, went on with George Stephanopoulos.
Yes,
Don't leave your communities.
Yeah. But I mean, obviously,
tell that to the hurricane.
Yeah. And also, the people smugglers are saying something completely different.
Absolutely,
which he has no control over. I mean, they've literally turned up in Biden shirts at the moment, like literally Biden shirts.
Yeah, and it's funny. They're turning up in Biden shirts, but with Trump messaging.
Yes,
Biden has opened the border. Yeah.
And the New York Times talked to various asylum seekers who were saying that literally it was on the news that the borders of America were open in Central America. So that's a hard message to combat, right? Anyway,
it was probably on Fox News.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Okay, so and what's the result of all this? Okay, so you got two kinds of facilities. You've got the customs facilities, which are the jails, essentially. Yep. Where they're supposed to stay for 3 days.
Yes.
Then you've got the HHS facilities, which are the refugee resettlement, which are nicer facilities. I mean, they're still facilities, but they're nicer. The HHS facilities are full. They take like 8,500 beds. They're full.
Yeah.
No more.
Yes.
Done. So the customs facilities are just filling up. They're up to 4,200 kids in them now.
Yeah.
Under Trump, the maximum number was 2,600.
Right, yeah.
So that's not a good situation. Because to talk about, say, the Donner facility.
Yes, yeah.
I mentioned it on the show. There's currently 1,800 kids in there. It takes 250. Yeah, so they're literally taking turns sleeping on the floor.
Yeah.
That's the situation there. So anyway, it's not a good situation. I should correct some misinformation that's out there at the moment. A lot of people, I don't know if they're doing it on purpose, they're using a number 13,000 children in custody. It suggests it's gone from 4,200 children to 13,000. No, 13,000 is all of them, the HHS facilities and the customs facilities combined.
Consider yourselves corrected,
So
misinformers.
there we go. The other thing which they're doing, which is very dodgy, much dodgier than Trump in my view, is they're not allowing photos, and they're not allowing lawyers, and they're not allowing journalists to see these facilities.
That is incredibly dodgy.
Yeah, I mean that goes to what you were saying before about being a genius at taking credit and not taking blame.
Absolutely, he is. Yeah.
And you've got Jen Psaki saying things like, because they're asking her about it, saying, we remain committed to transparency. I don't have an update for you on the timeline for access, but it's certainly something we support. She says. Very encouraging. Okay. So that's the situation.
Yeah, she is going to be able to get away with so much because of who she's following on from.
That is true.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are they doing about it? Because this is something that's not been reported at all. They are actually doing things. What are they doing about it? First of all, they're trying to expand capacity. They've got FEMA involved. They opened a Dallas Convention Center for 3,000 more migrants. Yeah. But that's a very short-term solution.
That is very short-term.
You can't keep opening up forever.
Yes.
They're making the processing faster Trump made processing much slower, actually.
Yes.
Because he wanted to fingerprint and do all the biometric testing of the sponsors of refugees coming, just in case they were illegal, so then he could deport all of them.
Yes.
They've stopped that.
Yeah.
And so now they're actually processing them faster, which will help.
Yeah.
They're restarting the Central American Minors Program, which basically allows children in Central America to come directly over to America, but you need a relative who's already in America to do that.
Yep.
So it doesn't affect everyone. Mm-hmm. They're changing the system entirely in a way, which is that they're combining those HHS facilities and customs facilities.
Yes.
So you can hold many more people in a humane way.
Right, yes.
But that's going to take a few months to come online.
Yep.
They're also taking up what I was just saying about the Remain in Mexico thing, doing it right. They're not doing Remain in Mexico, but they're basically doing the third country agreements and Remain in Mexico under a different name, where what they're doing is
that's also a very typical Biden move.
Where they're expanding the capacity of Mexico to hold people while being processed.
Yeah.
And they're going to create processing centers in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. So none of the bullshit El Salvador people have to go to the Honduras and then they stay there.
Yeah.
You can do it from El Salvador, but we'll be processing you there. And then if you don't qualify, you stay there. If you do qualify, you get to come. So if you put the money in it, and I hope they do, I think that is a humane way to deal with the situation. Because look, we might have different ideology on this. My personal ideology is I'm very pro-immigration, but I do think you need to know who is coming. You can't just allow people. Personally, I think that you can't have a situation where there is no information on who is coming. People are sneaking in and all the rest of it. That doesn't just go for the border. That goes for the airports. That goes for everything. I would increase immigration levels considerably myself.
Yeah.
But I do want to have control over who is coming. And so that's why I support humane methods of processing. Right. Anyway, you can disagree or disagree. That is basically the situation. Do you have anything to say?
Well, no, just on this point about why do you think this is the biggest political issue of the next 3 months?
The reason why is because I think that they've got some good ideas on how to deal with this, but this is all going to take 2 to 3, maybe 4 months. And I think there's a chance. At the moment, there's 100,000 migrants in February.
Yeah.
I think there's a chance to be 200,000 migrants next month. I think it's going to increase fast.
Okay, but
And just to finish off.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be able to do the no photo thing for too long, right?
Yeah.
And they are just going to, they're already out of room. They are going to have to be very, very cruel to the people they're looking after because there is no other option. And so I think that it's going to disenfranchise the left. I think the left will be horrified at the things that are going to happen in the next few months.
Yeah.
And the right are going to be looking at those numbers and be going on about those numbers. It's one of those wedge issues where you're displeasing everyone and there's no practical way to get around it.
Yeah.
And so I think that basically for the next 2-3 months he's running the gauntlet. I think he'll be okay in 6 months or whatever, like when the medium term issues go, and the push factors will reduce, I think, in time. But in the meantime, I think this is going to really hurt him.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's already his lowest polling issue. Like he's already underwater by like 10 points on how he's handling immigration.
Yeah, no, look, I'm not doubting that this is going to be a major humanitarian crisis. And it's a crisis that is going to keep recurring, and it won't be solved until the continental dimension of the crisis is actually dealt with, which is, first of all, US drug policy is a major factor in the deterioration of the situation in Central American countries. Second, there's been, under Trump, there was this major aversion to aid to those countries.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a solution.
He actually zeroed it out.
Yeah. Trump perversely claimed that it was somehow rewarding these countries to give them. So there needs to be a much bigger aid effort than was going on before. But the reason, yes, it's a bad political issue for Trump. For Biden. But I just wonder, the pandemic is still going on. And I think that issues around the pandemic are going to continue to dominate the next 3 or 4 months. Because even though there are 200, and I completely believe that, 200,000 people arriving at the border, one of the things that reporting brings out is even people living at the border rarely see those. But given how much of Trump policy was actually about keeping them out of sight, keeping them away from that. And now, as you have pointed out, Biden policy is all about keeping them out of sight of everyone. Now, sure, the left is going to want to expose what's actually going on, and the right is also going to want to make this as visible a problem as possible. On the other hand, given that over the last year, people have been dealing directly with an issue which affects everyone's lives so directly, I do wonder how much of an impact an issue like this, which certainly is all about the lives of the people who turn up at the border, but has so little impact on the lives of most Americans. I mean, I could be wrong about this. This could have the same old power that it always does. But I just wonder whether, while that pandemic is still going on, whether that's going to have the same kind of political power. Maybe it will.
Look, I think you make a really good point about the fact that number one, this has little effect on everyday life.
Yes.
For many Americans.
Yeah.
Especially given that at this point in time, probably more than any time for the last few decades, the working class have been looked after.
Yes.
By the bill that just passed.
Yes, yeah,
It was a big...
Only for a year. Only for a year, lucky working class.
Yeah, It's not solved, but I'm talking in the short term.
Yeah, no.
We're talking the short term.
Yeah.
Like, what turns people nasty is when they can't afford to eat.
Yeah.
And then they go, and these immigrants are coming and all the rest of it. There's not going to be that for the next few months because they're actually being looked after for once.
Yeah.
And so, look, I think that is a legitimate point you make there. Where you and I disagree slightly is, like we've already mentioned, I'm more optimistic about where the pandemic's going than you are. I don't think the numbers are going up anymore. I think the vaccine numbers are going to go up a lot because Johnson & Johnson and Merck are going to start pumping out vaccines big time in the next few weeks.
Okay, well, can we talk about this now? Because I'm still worried about that hesitant chunk of the population. So I keep seeing really disagreeing.
Sorry, just before we do that, let me just say one more thing about this, and then we can move on to COVID completely about that.
Okay.
And that is that this is perversely like COVID, in my view, like COVID originally was, where it's one of those stories where there's a new number every day.
Right.
Like when COVID first went crazy, everyone's looking at the case numbers and the death numbers and it's on the news all the time. This is one of those stories, immigration, where every week there is another number of kids coming over, people in facilities, whatever. It's, in fact, there's almost every day there's a new number.
Yeah.
And those numbers are going to keep on getting worse for a long time.
Yeah.
So there's a little drip aspect about it.
I still think those numbers aren't going to mean much to most people.
Quite possibly. Okay, now I'll keep on going with what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The hesitancy.
Yeah. So there still is a hesitant chunk of the population. Now, I keep seeing conflicting estimates about what herd immunity for COVID would actually look like.
I don't think anyone knows.
What number would have to be reached. But as I've mentioned before, we know for other diseases, it's like 95%. Measles, 95% of the population is where you get herd immunity. COVID's way more, just because of the circulation of COVID, it seems like there's just going to be a lot more of that around. And yet occasionally I hear estimates, 60% of the population is herd immunity. I don't think it is. I don't think it's anywhere near herd immunity.
Well, Fauci has a tendency to change his numbers a bit.
Yeah.
But for what it's worth, he seems to hover between 70 and 75%.
Right.
Usually. Now, I don't know if we trust that or not. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
But even if it's 80%, I think they're going to. 80% starting to push against the hesitant number.
Yeah.
But I reckon they'll get to 75 pretty sharply before they have problems. But then, if it's much more than that, then I agree.
Yeah.
You've got a problem.
I am worried about that. And also, even if there is sort of general, generally healthy people aren't getting it anymore, you're still going to have episodes of nursing home outbreaks, outbreaks in vulnerable populations.
Well, the nursing homes at the moment, I don't, off the top of my head, have the number of the percentage of over 65s who have been vaccinated, but nursing home outbreaks at the moment, it might change, is very close to zero. very close to zero. Like I saw a graph the other day where it's dropped off completely. Like nursing home residents, there's way less nursing home residents getting COVID now than the staffers.
Yes, yeah.
Like it's dropped way off. But
the era of nursing home visits is going to begin again.
That is true.
Yeah.
That is absolutely true.
I mean, so this is what I'd be worried about.
Yeah, look, that's fair.
Older people are often harder to protect through vaccination. But, okay, rest of the population goes back to sort of this in the vicinity of herd immunity number, but, it's not perfect and someone goes and visits a nursing home. But, I could see that happening. Yeah. I would like to be optimistic, but I'm not.
No, that's fair enough. I think that's reasonable, and we will find out soon enough.
Yes.
I do think that I'm less worried about the Republican men who are hesitant than people like they're the real standout group. Like you're talking like 45-50% of Trump supporters saying they're not going to get it. I'm less worried about them because I feel like as time goes on, the heat's going to go out of this as a partisan issue.
Yeah, I do keep seeing op-eds sort of directed at Trump saying like, sir, you should become a vaccine ambassador.
To be fair to him, he's been trying to take credit for the vaccine as hard as he can for the last few weeks.
He has been.
He really has, which is I don't know what else he's supposed to do. He was on Batamoro. Did you send the clip of that? I'll just play
don't show him, please. No, don't. I'm taking a sabbatical from his voice.
Just for you. I won't play the clip.
Yeah.
But I'll play for everyone else. There it is.
I would recommend it, and I would recommend it to a lot of people that don't want to get it, and a lot of those people voted for me, frankly. But, we have our freedoms, and we have to live by that, and I agree with that also. But it's a great vaccine, it's a safe vaccine, and it's something that works. And we've been working round the clock, and what I got the FDA to do, this would have happened. This would have happened in many, many years from now if I didn't get involved.
Yeah.
Okay.
And look, I think that
so he's selling it.
Yeah. Look, I think that it is good that he is now actually making statements about everyone should get the vaccine, even if it is as a way of claiming credit for it. I would also say I think that Biden has claimed too much credit.
Yeah, I think so too.
There certainly were some things that were in disarray when he took over, which have been fixed. But I kind of think that was partly a product of how quickly the vaccines were actually developed. That got way ahead of the logistics that would be required. Trump administration probably could have done a better job than that. But given how badly every level of government performed, across COVID, I'm not going to put too much blame on them for that. And also, I think that what's happened at the moment in terms of these issues being fixed, I think that any president would have done that. Just as I think any president probably would have done something similar to Operation Warp Speed, I think any president probably would have fixed it. So both of them are claiming far too much credit. In the case of Trump, I have very little sympathy because I can remember the first 3 years of Trump's presidency where he kept claiming that the US was in some kind of economic depression before he took over and created the greatest economic miracle, which in reality involved rates of economic growth that were slower than Barack Obama's final 2 years.
Absolutely. Okay. Should we talk about something else?
Yes, let's talk about something
else. Why don't we go into the intelligence reports, because that's pretty hot.
Yeah, so 2 intelligence reports have been released in the last week. One of which we'll get the I believe less consequential one out of the way first.
Okay.
Right. So that's the report about foreign interference in the election. I found this report maddeningly short on details. Okay, there were basically no quantitative estimates of how big this interference was, except for saying Russian interference was the biggest, Iranian interference was the second biggest, and China, they say, didn't try at all.
Although I should just jump in there.
Yes.
There was a report from the Intelligence Community Analytic Ombudsman a month ago.
Right.
January 6th of all days.
Yes.
So not a lot of people read that one.
Yeah. I certainly did.
Yeah, which explicitly said
yes.
that they found that the China analysts were much slower to claim undue influence interference than the Russia analysts were. And in the Ombudsman's view, it was because they were worried their intelligence would get exploited by Trump to run anti-China policies. And he felt that they were trying to do an end run around Trump by not giving him anything to work with, which is not their job as the intelligence community.
Yeah.
But if that is the case, then...
You reckon those China numbers their assessment is sus?
All I'm saying is that we should just be aware there's a possibility it was. Because so there was that paragraph at the end of the report that said, there's a minority view on this, but let's not worry about that. And they just left it at that.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting there was some massive China effort that they're covering up.
Yeah, I mean,
but they might have downplayed
the report
it
said, and this makes a lot of sense, China decided that the outcome of the election was not important enough to Chinese interests either way, that it was worth, risking the kind of blowback that would come from it. That makes a lot of sense. But I suppose where I'm leading with this is I'm skeptical that any interference from Russia on behalf of Trump, because one of the findings of this report, not very surprisingly, was Russia wanted Trump to win, or Iran on behalf of Biden, which they said was a much smaller effort. I think they also said a few others had a go, like Venezuela, Hezbollah,
Cuba.
Yeah. Was that probably like one Facebook page with 200 likes? But I'm very, very skeptical that any of this came close to making any kind of difference, because it's like last time around when all of these Russian websites were detailed. They're like, oh, this one was seen by 15,000 people. It's like the president of the United States had 80 million followers on Twitter, and he was pumping out disinformation at a much bigger rate than any foreign power could ever hope to do. It's just worldwide at the moment, the biggest source of disinformation is the United States. The United States is a massive net exporter of disinformation. That is one trade deficit you don't have to worry about, Trump. And what's more, he was responsible for most of it. Like at times, you just sit back and go, why do we even care about the Russian disinformation effort when just look at what is going on in the United States of America?
Yeah, that's fair.
So that's my cri de coeur about that first intelligence report.
There was only one thing I cared about from that intelligence report, and they
Chance?
didn't say it.
Yes.
Which was because a lot of it was already out there. Derkach was out there. The Ukraine thing was out there. We knew all that stuff. All I cared about was, did the stuff on Hunter Biden's laptop come from Russia or not?
Right.
Because that was the question. We were talking about this at the time, saying we think probably these emails are real, but the laptop story doesn't seem real. Like was Russia associated with the dissemination of those emails, or were they hacked off his phone at some point in time, or some shit? Not a word.
Not a word.
So I was like, oh well, fuck.
There you go. You've disappointed Chaz.
Which I think we can conclude they don't have evidence that Russia had anything to do with that. So maybe Hunter Biden is the biggest idiot on earth.
That's right.
Anyway, go on.
Now the second report is a lot more consequential and leads to my next point about violence against Asian Americans. So there was a report from the Director of National Intelligence saying that, I'm just trying to replicate the exact term they used, domestic violent extremists, not using the word terrorists, which, I mean, I would like to see a across-the-board scaling down of the use of the term terrorists. Domestic violent extremists are a major threat. More attacks are suspected. The report often tried to shy away from talking directly about the right. The term right wing, I don't think it was mentioned very much, if at all. By the way, the parallel thing happening in Australia, where I think ASIO has said, or some intelligence agency has said in Australia, we're no longer talking about either Islamic extremism or right wing extremism. Because it's neither the religion nor the ideology that's the problem. It's the
extremism.
It's the extremism.
Yes.
Which I can't help but notice that they make this move after Islamic extremism ceases to become a problem and when right-wing extremism becomes a major problem. But, anyway.
Yeah, that's a coincidence.
It's just coincidence. But anyway, and in fact, in this report, they go to this great effort. Okay, so they say the biggest problem is white supremacists. They're quite explicit. Well, they don't use the term white supremacist. They say people who believe in the superiority of the white race.
Okay.
Yeah. They also
That's catchy.
They also point out, people who are, who don't believe the government is legitimate are a big problem, but they're like, but there are both, militia versions of this and anarchist versions of this. And then there's a lot of bullshit about, people who are against animal testing are also a major problem. And I'm like, are we in the fucking late 80s here?
Yeah, and we've
not a terrorist threat, but I remember when there was a desperate attempt to label that a form of terrorism.
Yeah, and we've talked about this at length. There's a difference between your white supremacist type extremists who often is violent.
Yes, yeah.
And your pet people who damage property. There's
a massive
obvious difference. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And also they mentioned abortion extremists, both pro-choice and pro-life. So, waiting for that wave of pro-choice terrorism. Anyway, so some interesting things about this. One was the paragraph that pointed out that it's no longer necessarily your classic well-organised, ideologically motivated, ideologically coherent groups that are necessarily the problem. Or at least they're quantitatively not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is people who are, they use the term lone wolf, which I don't like very much, but it's people who are creating their own sort of worldview that doesn't necessarily have ideological coherence, but often in isolation, often not members of a group, and, going down various rabbit holes. So and then
is that their way of saying QAnon, or do they count QAnon?
No, this is the thing. That's actually quite a good description of QAnon in terms of everyone who's an adherent of QAnon has their own version of it. It's not an actual group. Like there isn't organisation of action around QAnon. When someone takes action around QAnon, they're generally doing it on their own. But it's this is why I don't like the term lone wolf. It implies something less dangerous or smaller. Yeah. This report actually points out, no, quantitatively, that's actually a bigger problem now. Okay. And I think when you look at the Capitol riot, what you see is, on the one hand, while there were organised group elements there, like the Proud Boys, etc., the majority of that crowd, you can almost kind of see them as it's a bunch of lone wolves come together. And when they're all together, they're very dangerous.
The pack.
Yeah. But another really interesting thing about this report is, you might remember in 2009, the Department of Homeland Security had a report which they did not even make public.
I do remember this, yes.
Which got leaked, saying that right-wing extremism was a growing problem, and that Barack Obama's backlash against the first African-American president was going to be a major problem, and that people's paranoia about increasing gun restrictions was going to fuel violence, and that returned veterans who were alienated from society, had access to weapons, and were attracted to extreme ideologies could be a problem. They were not pulling this out of their asses. The reason why that was included in the report was because 15 years prior to that was a description of Timothy McVeigh. And there were a lot more returned veterans around in 2009 than there were in 1994.
Not to mention every single cop show in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
The bad guy was
yeah, that's also true. And unfortunately, like among these groups, there have been, not only is law enforcement overrepresented, there have been military veterans, military veterans involved. But, of course, what happened to this report, as you may well remember, was Republicans got massively upset about it. Like, what was his name? Bill Arrakis. Can't remember his first name, but the Republican congressman who did a lot of grandstanding about it said, "I'm personally offended that you're saying that gun owners and veterans, are an extremism problem." So it fit very nicely into culture wars. And even though it was completely true, essentially it got shelved. The focus got taken completely off it, and no one was allowed to talk about the problem of right-wing extremism again during the Obama administration. We're at a point now, thankfully, where that aversion to actually talking about right-wing extremism has been overcome. If you ever want, by the way, a great example of how I mean, because it was really following on from the Ruby Ridge massacre in 1991, where federal agents killed a guy and his family and his dog because he was amassing guns in northwestern Idaho, which became a real sort of cause célèbre for the militia movement. That was then followed by Waco, which was just a catastrophic, I would say catastrophic overreaction by the government to a group that was genuinely problematic in many ways, but not, we're going to go in and kill 76 of them, problematic. Those incidents created this environment where there's this increasing, by the time of the Oklahoma City bombing, there was this increasing kind of political correctness around talking about militias. But he's not representative of militia groups. In fact, what did Republican lawmakers in Congress do in the wake of the Oklahoma City bombing? They invited militia leaders to Capitol Hill to testify about their grievances. Now, okay, maybe it's actually a good idea when you have this level of conflict in society to let people be as open about their grievances as possible. But can you imagine after 9/11 saying, let's invite some Islamists to talk about their grievance? No, every Islamic grievance was written off as completely illegitimate, regardless of whether it had anything to do with Al-Qaeda or not. It was a complete mirror image of the discourse around militias, where it was, Republicans were actually heightening the legitimacy of these groups and basically saying we can't let one bad apple spoil the barrel. We seem to have moved beyond that discourse, I hope.
Yeah, we do. I mean, sadly, it's because we've seen so many examples of it that are negative.
Yes.
But yeah, no, we seem to. I just wanted to pick up on what you teased at the beginning, where you said you're going to link this to the Asian American thing.
Yes.
Go for it.
Okay. Yeah. So, absolutely horrific violence in Atlanta this week, with a 21-year-old man going to 3 different Asian massage businesses and killing a total of 8 people, 4 of whom were women of Korean descent, 2 of whom were women of other Asian descent. I haven't heard any accurate reporting on exactly what that descent was. And then I think there were 1 or 2 men killed along with that as well. So he headed south to Florida to continue his rampage, was picked up about 150 miles outside of Atlanta, was arrested without incident, immediately confessed to what he had done, and then there was a press conference given by the Cherokee County Sheriff's spokesperson, Captain Jay Barker, I think his name is, where it was just one of the worst press conferences you can imagine, one of the worst statements you can imagine, because he said, the shooter, he'd had a really bad day. This was a really bad day for him.
To be fair, that is accurate. It was a very bad day.
Okay, I'm not going to take the bait.
No, that's fine.
Yes. But also, he said that clearly he's very influenced by what the shooter himself has told the police. Yeah. And I'm kind of quite surprised that he was almost sort of transcribing this directly, because the shooter had protested this had nothing to do with race. He said that...
Just a coincidence.
He said he has a sex addiction, and he saw these massage parlors as a source of temptation that he wanted to eliminate. He said, but we're still investigating whether there's a racial motivation here. Right, just keeping in mind he has killed 6 women of Asian descent. Now, that demonstrates this complete illiteracy in terms of thinking about race and violence and racism in the United States, not to mention how they intersect with things like gender. Because everything you need to know is there in the shooter's statement, right? A sexual temptation that he needed to eliminate. Okay, so in a word, complete dehumanization of the people that he was killing. There is no way that this wasn't linked to race. And it's very clear how it was linked to race, linked to this dehumanization of the victims. He did not see these victims as full human beings with full lives. They were instead a problem for him that he needed to get rid of. Now, there is a very long history in the United States of seeing Asian women in these completely sexualized terms, okay, as a source of temptation. It goes back to something even bigger than that. It goes back to Orientalism. So Edward Said wrote this classic book in 1978, Orientalism, about the way that the West had constructed the Middle East as the other to the West. And so within that view of the Orient as representing everything that the West did not, it was a place where Westerners could go to do things that they couldn't do in their own countries. Now, that was the Orient for Europeans was the Middle East. The Orient for Americans and for Australians, to a large extent, was always East Asia, right? So East Asia was this place that was dangerous and exotic and inviting all at the same time. And there was this real sort of parallel between that and European attitudes towards the Middle East of like everything you could ever want. Drugs, sex, whatever it is, it's there. It's dangerous to get, but it's there. And it's waiting there for you. And if you're a white man, you can be the poorest, most despised white man in your own country, but you can go there and be a god, right? You can go there and get access to all of these things. And some of the things that were feeding into this were, first of all, the idea that the population of these places was so big that no individual there matters. Second was, the economic disparity between the West and Asia. It's like, yeah, you can go there with $1 and, just get whatever you want, especially sex. Now, the legacy of this kind of 19th century and 20th century American view of Asia, which of course is exacerbated by the Second World War, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War, right? 3 consecutive wars in which the enemy is Asian, but in the same time, in all 3 places, this sort of grand mythology opens up about, yes, going over there and fighting over there was hell, but there was always solace to be found in the brothels, solace to be found among these women. That all of this feeds into this culture where there are just constant cultural depictions of Asian women in completely sexualized terms. One of the most famous ones of these is not even an American one. It's an Italian opera. It's Puccini's Madame Butterfly, but an American is the major character. That in the 80s was then reworked into a musical abomination called Miss Saigon. And it's a good example of the genre where, first of all, if there's going to be a romance between a white man and an Asian woman, well, it's completely doomed, right? Because this can't be a permanent thing. It's going to be temporary. In that story, an Asian woman desperately, essentially, wants to be saved from her own country. She can't be saved in the end, so kills herself. That's so even when there's an attempt to make Asian women into something more than just objects of sex, it's still not a well, fully formed, fully developed character. And in fact, just actually thinking about cultural depictions of white man and Asian woman, it's constantly Asian woman ends up dead. It's all doomed. Asian woman is not a full person. Asian woman is just this sad figure. It's
interesting you say that because I was just thinking, the Asian woman doesn't end up dead. In this case, the white man ends up dead. But a lot of what you said also rings true with South Pacific, which, of course, is known as being the source of one of the more powerful anti-racist songs of the 20th century, which is Carefully Taught. It was like this anti-racist anthem. about the white man and the Asian woman, but what you're saying about the not fully realized character is absolutely true, and the doomed and all the rest of it.
I just realised you're a lot more into musicals than I am. Yeah, and I mean, it's. I was trying to think on the way here. When do you actually see? Now, I'm not a huge film buff, so there are probably lots of examples. In fact, if you want to know more about stuff like this.
Talk to someone else.
A couple of film and literature scholars I want to mention, both Korean Americans, so ELAINE Kim, and actually my colleague at the University of Sydney, Jane Park. Jane Park's book, Yellow Futures, is very good about the other side. Well, it's good on a lot of things, but one of the things it's good on is the other side of this equation is Asian men are seen as completely desexualized.
Look in the blurb for the information there.
Yeah.
I'll put it up.
So Asian men are seen as completely desexualized. Like as much as you've got these representations of Asian women with white men where Asian women aren't fully realized characters, that then still massively outnumbers the number of representations of Asian men with white women because that's not a story that Hollywood wants to tell. Oh, fuck that. So you don't see that until really quite recently. But I was trying to think of when's the first time that Hollywood makes a film that depicts an interracial romance where an Asian woman is actually a fully fledged, fully verbal character who doesn't end up dead. It's probably Wayne's World, where, that's not, when you're turning to Wayne's World as an example of social progress, that's not a good sign. And on this sort of flip side of the desexualization of Asian men, to go back to another horrific misogynist massacre a few years ago, which was Elliot Rodger, who killed a bunch of white female college students, was set out to kill a bunch of white female college students in it was somewhere in California. In his writings about it, he said Asian men are he was half Asian. He said Asian men are ugly, Asian men are disgusting. Someone who's half Asian can't possibly hope to get with white women. And this was his revenge on white women. So this is this horrifically internalized picture of Asian men as asexual or undesirable, which is the flip side of this picture of Asian women as submissive and sexually available. And another part of the broader dehumanization, and Jane Park is very good on this, is whereas African Americans were dehumanized historically by being likened to animals, Asians are often dehumanized by being likened to robots, right? By being likened to objects who serve useful purposes but are not fully human. And Asians are often described in the United States as a model minority. Now, the idea of a model minority is something is used to bash African Americans. It's like, well, no, it's not that this is a racist country that hates non-white people. Look at Asians. Look at how they've succeeded, by working hard and caring about education. That model minority status does not help Asian Americans. It's a heavy burden to bear for Asian Americans, and it's something that is really used to bash African Americans more than to lift up Asian Americans. Instead, it's basically another set of stereotypes. And they are also dehumanizing stereotypes. It's like, no, you're not fully human. You're some kind of amazing calculator. And by the way, these stereotypes go back a surprisingly long way. The idea of Asians as mechanized, kind of mechanized people. There was a whole discourse around Asians having these clever hands. Asian women, especially, having these incredibly clever, crafty hands, and there was something sort of very mechanistic about it. And so, these, what you might see as positive stereotypes, they just contribute to that dehumanization of these aren't people, these are useful. Well, these are objects that can be useful to us, but in the case of this Atlanta shooter, they've become this unacceptable source of temptation and need to be removed.
I feel like there's a lot of contradictions in what you're describing there. In that, I'm not saying not from you, I'm saying from the cliches. In that, you're talking about the the cliche of there's a million of them and $1 will buy whatever you need and all the rest of it. And the fact that like at the same time these people are not just outshining black people, outshining white people, outshining every people. Yeah. Like Asian incomes are way above white incomes and everyone else's. And and then you have these weird situations where with affirmative action in America, the issue is trying to reduce the number of Asian people in high schools, in selective high schools, because they're just completely outflanking white people, black people, Hispanic people, every people. And it's just weird. You got this strange mix of undervalued and overlord in the cliches. So clashing at the same time.
Yeah, well, that's the sort of robot thing.
Yeah.
It's this depiction of Asians as superhuman robots. So yes, they're able to do all of this great stuff, but their lives don't matter.
I wonder if there's, and this is just me completely talking my ass. There's not something I've studied or really know much about, but I wonder if there is an element of like the cliches associated with Jews through history has been describing them almost as a virus which takes over and dominates and wins all the time. They end up being the richest and the most successful and all the rest. And the very success of the Jewish people was held against them and resented.
That's right.
I wonder if there's an element of that potentially, if not now, in the future for Asian people in America. I don't know.
There could be, but you're certainly getting to the point that you can tell a lot about sort of social order and broader social context by looking at the dehumanizing metaphors that are used for certain groups. So with African Americans, it's always dangerous animals of some kind. Yes, with Jews, it's always parasites or rats or vermin, something that successfully lives with you and exploits you. And then with Asians, it's objects, basically. It's not even animal. It's not even animal metaphors. And that is incredibly dehumanizing. So if you want to know where the mindset comes from of tempting object to be eliminated, it is just right throughout American culture.
The other thing which I find interesting about when you talk about America and its relationship with Asian Americans is the weird acronym which they sought Asian people into in America, which is AAPI, which it does sound like an insurance company, but leaving that aside, Asian American Pacific Islanders. They basically put everyone from the Pacific Ocean through to Indians all in the same basket, which is bizarre because there are so many different cultures and situations across that spectrum.
Yes.
And I expect that's not going to last very long. I expect as time goes on, it's probably because there aren't many of them. I expect as time goes on, there's going to be more differentiation in the public mind. But it's just really weird. Whenever there is a discussion in the media about Asian people, I never know who they're talking about. Because
there is this interesting tendency in the United States to talk about groups in continental terms. So Latinos, that entire continent of Latin America, Asians, African Americans, and I think it actually comes from the fact that the term African American has been analogized to other groups. But it's not a kind of terminology that you see anywhere else. Like you don't hear the term Asian Australian very often.
No.
So I think that to go back to the original point, there's a real problem with the way that race and racism gets talked about in terms of it has to be seen as this deeply kind of moralized thing of someone saying, I really hate people of that colour, I really hate people of that race, that is motivating me to kill them. There certainly is that out there, but that is never the biggest problem when it comes to race. Not even when it comes to racist violence. There are all kinds of other ways that people can be dehumanized, to an extent that enables violence.
Is 6:15 your limit?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I was going to get to policy time. We're a bit short of time for policy time.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do one thing quickly on policy time, and then we'll move to a little bit of filibuster update because there was a bit of news this week about that. There was good news for all. But what time is it? Policy time. I think this is how it goes. Policy time. Something like that.
I assume there's music going on.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope I never hear it.
I'm only going to do a little bit of the policy. There was a bunch here, but I just want to a really weird one, which I think is only going to be this week. So that's what I'm talking about now. The Equal Rights Amendment. Okay. This is a very strange one.
Yep.
The Equal Rights Amendment is a constitutional amendment that was first introduced in 1923, but it was passed finally by Congress in 1972. Essentially, the key of it is equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Now, I feel like a lot of this has been surpassed by law since they first did that.
Yeah.
But regardless, it required ratification of 38 states by March 1979 in order to be part of the Constitution. They got to 35 out of 38. Then the Congress extended the deadline to 1982, 3 more years. They got nothing. And nothing happened until Trump came along. And then, for whatever reason, the Democrats decided they were really interested in the Equal Rights Amendment again. And Nevada in 2017 signed on, Illinois in 2018 signed on, and Virginia in 2020 signed on. So that's 38 states. Woo! In the Constitution? Well, not so fast. That's obviously 30 years, 35 years after it expired.
Yeah.
This month, the federal judge, just in case there was any doubt, ruled that the last 3 didn't count. But the House... On Wednesday, they passed a joint resolution to just remove the deadline from 1982 and say, so therefore it does count, in our view. We'll see what the courts have to say about that.
All right.
4 Republicans joined in.
Who were they?
I don't have it here, unfortunately. I would look it up, but I'm running against the clock here. Should say that this, to me, seems kind of ridiculous for a few reasons, but the not the Equal Rights Amendment, but just what's been going on implementing it. First of all, 5 states revoked their support during that 35-year period. So I feel...
Which ones?
Kentucky was one of them. I don't remember the other 4 off the top of my head. But so I feel like it's a bit unfair to count the 3 that have signed on and not count the 5 that signed off. But on top of that, a bit of common sense here, that when they created this Equal Rights Amendment and 35 states signed on, the word sex meant something very different to what it means now. Like, essentially now, the only use of this amendment would be to transgender people, essentially. And there's no way that those first 35 states were signing on for transgender equality in 1979.
That's true.
So So it seems to me like it's probably time to start over with a new amendment, which is what Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, even though she was the one who was advocating back in the 70s for the Equal Rights Amendment. So, she was consistent in that regard. And it's also the academic, because after the Bostock ruling last year, thanks to Gorsuch, the law has passed this by for transgender people as well, largely. Not completely, but largely. So I don't know it really matters, but it's just a weird bit of finagling going on at the moment. And the House has passed it. The Senate is going to hear it. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. Do you have any views on this?
No, I don't.
No, okay.
No, it's the first time I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. But weird.
Yeah, interesting.
So, I might talk more about the Violence Against Women Act next week. This was the next thing I was going to talk about.
Yep.
I'll skip past for the People Act as well. I want to talk about the filibuster briefly.
Yes.
For 10 minutes.
I promise not to filibuster you.
Thank you. This first came up this week when Stacey Abrams talked about why she thought the For the People Act should be unfilibusterable.
And just as we have seen an exemption carved into the filibuster rules for judicial appointments, for cabinet appointments, and for budget reconciliation, the protection of our democracy, especially in the wake of the insurrection on January 6th and its continued ripples throughout our state legislatures, it demands that the entire U.S. Senate acknowledge that protection of democracy is so fundamental that it should be exempt from the filibuster rules.
Okay, now I found that a particularly weak argument, because, and the reason for that is that that I feel like those kinds of arguments can be used for almost anything. You can say, surely the protection of life is the most important aspect of the Constitution, and so therefore abortion laws should be not filibusterable. You know, the Second Amendment is right there in the Constitution, so therefore gun laws should not be filibusterable. We can keep on going. Climate change, is there anything more important than that? That should not be filibusterable, etc. You can make that argument for almost anything. Most things, hopefully, what Congress do is important. So you can use
once again though, Chaz, you are massively overestimating the role of logic in all of this.
Of course. That is my burden.
Yes.
But having said that, Biden then, off the back of that, started talking about a talking filibuster, probably because he knew Manchin had been talking about a talking filibuster.
Yeah.
So
this thing again.
Yeah. And so all of a sudden...
Everyone who really wants to hear Rand Paul talk for another 14 hours.
Well, yeah, I'll get to that.
14 weeks.
And I should say, like I always say with this, we talk Joe Manchin a lot.
Yeah.
Because he likes getting in the news. But the most important person, in my view, never gets talked about, and that's Kyrsten Sinema. The silent Kyrsten Sinema.
I wouldn't say the silent cinema. I wouldn't say that she never gets talked about.
Well, not like Joe Manchin gets talked about.
No.
And she herself has just said nothing about this at all publicly. We have no idea what her view is about the filibuster. We know she wants to keep filibuster.
Yes.
But if she wants a talking filibuster or not, we have no idea. She is going to be the 50th vote, not Joe Manchin. But anyway, but we keep on talking about Joe Manchin. But after Biden did that, that then drew the turtle out of his shell, and Mitch McConnell came out, and I'm going to play a couple of clips just so people know what I'm talking about here. I try not to get too aroused. We got 2 Mitch McConnell clips.
Oh my god! Sorry, everyone.
Here's the
Chaz has got a problem.
here's the first one.
If the Democrats break the rules to kill Rule 22 on a 50-50 basis, then we will use every other rule to make tens of millions of Americans' voices heard. Perhaps the majority would come after the other rules next. Perhaps Rule 22 would just be the first domino of many, until the Senate ceased to be distinct from the House in any respect. This chaos would not open up an express lane to liberal change. It would not open up an express lane for the Biden presidency to speed into the history books. The Senate would be more like a 100-car pileup. Nothing moving.
That was a real anticlimax.
That's why does he read so slowly for? He's got it right in front of him. Why is he?
This is why I warn you about the talking filibuster.
Yeah.
You underestimate the ability of these people to keep fucking talking.
That is true. But I know what you're thinking right now. What you're thinking is more Mitch McConnell. So Mitch McConnell then went through all the things he was going to do as a threat to the Democrats. And this was his list.
How about this? Nationwide right to work for working Americans. Defunding Planned Parenthood in sanctuary cities on day one. A whole new era of domestic energy production. Sweeping new protections for conscience and the right to life of the unborn. Concealed carry reciprocity in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Massive hardening of security on our southern border.
Wake up. That's the end of Mitch McConnell. Now,
unfortunately, it's not the end of Mitch McConnell, but it's the end of that segment.
Now, it's very odd to threaten Democrats with reforms he thinks are good, for a start. But my response to all that would be, okay, do it. Every one of those things is reversible. Like, if they're popular, they'll stay. If not, they'll be reversed. That's how democracy works. It's very strange, the mindset that is going into this argument here. But I want to repeat my main point from the show here, because I think it's an important point to make. And that is the sheer bad faith of what I just played you. Okay? He said, if you remove the filibuster, we're going to be as much of a nuisance as we can be.
Yes.
We won't just replicate what exists now. We're going to make it worse. We'll go out of our way to make it as bad as possible. Yeah. Why? He doesn't say. We just will. He says you can remove all those rules that we use, but then it'll be like the House.
Yeah.
So what? What's wrong with that? He doesn't say. It just would be bad.
Thing is, it would not be indistinguishable from the House. The Senate is
6 years.
It's distinguished from the House by the fact that it's 6 years and by the fact that all of the states have equal representation. Those are the two distinguishing factors, like the ones that are actually in the Constitution, as opposed to the filibuster, which developed, sometime in the 20th century. It's not the filibuster that actually makes the Senate... Well, it's become one of the things that distinguishes the Senate. But that would not have destroyed the uniqueness.
But the fact is, whatever is bad, he doesn't say, because he knows to describe what the Senate is supposed to do right now.
Yes.
Would be to hammer home that it does not do that right now. Whatever it's meant to be doing.
That's a fantastic. Got him.
Which leads me to my major point, which is that
suffer, McConnell.
I don't know if you've heard of Catherine Tai. Normally, I would interact with you at this point, but I'm just racing the clock because you are being cute, and I'd love to jump in. I've got a point to make. I don't know if you know the name Catherine Tai. Most people don't. I didn't until 5 seconds after I started the research on Catherine Tai to find out that she is Biden's US trade representative, and she was confirmed this week.
Oh, I've heard of this person.
98-0.
Okay.
She was confirmed.
Wow.
Unanimously confirmed.
Jesus
okay?
Christ.
They confirmed it after they broke a filibuster. They confirmed it 98-0 after breaking a filibuster. Not a single person opposed her. There was never even a chance of stopping her because you need only 50 votes to beat a filibuster for nominees, right?
Yeah.
They did it purely, the filibuster, to waste time. Had nothing to do with her. They were just wasting time.
Yeah.
That's all. And that's your problem right there. They're not operating to protect minority rights.
No.
Mitch McConnell saying, this is all about protecting the say of America. No, it's not. If you were protecting the say of Americans, who support Republicans, it wouldn't be so bad. But they're simply trying to waste time. That's it. That's what the Senate has become, and there's no reason to maintain that.
Yeah.
Right. So, like I said, that is, I think, the fiction of this, that they act like that this is about policy disagreement, but it's not.
No.
Now, interestingly, when we're talking about maintaining traditions, which is what Mitch McConnell was, I learnt this week, I didn't know this, that the framers of the Constitution explicitly did not want a filibuster. The Articles of Confederation had you need 9 of 13 votes to pass anything. It's 70%.
Yes, yeah.
Supermajority. They explicitly rejected that.
Yes.
When they did the Constitution. Alexander Hamilton, the quote was, supermajority requirements serve to embarrass the administration, to destroy the energy of the government, and to substitute the pleasure, caprice, or artifices of a minority to the regular deliberations of a majority to the regular deliberations and decisions of a respectable majority. So they didn't want it.
Yeah.
That's the tradition. They didn't want it.
Well, okay. When you say they didn't want it, I mean, Hamilton was the representative of basically the strong government faction.
Sure. Yeah. But they didn't put it in there. Not just Hamilton. None of them put it in the Constitution on purpose. Yeah, no, it wasn't an accident.
No, but the Federalists kind of won that argument. All I'm saying is there is also this anti-federalist, counter-majoritarian strand that also runs right throughout American history and actually does get its way at some point.
Well, it's got its way at the moment.
Yeah.
The question is, in 1 minute, sorry, Dave, is how you reform it, right? And this is the key.
Yeah.
We've been talking about the talking filibuster as if it's one thing. It's not one thing. It's the rules around that thing that actually determine whether you end up with Rand Paul for 14 hours or not.
Right.
Because at the moment, you need 60 votes to beat a filibuster. If there's a talking filibuster, they either give up or you get 60 votes. Whether there's talking filibuster or not, you need 60 votes to stop it, right?
Yep.
Okay. Now, if you have the situation at the moment where there's 60 votes, you can, all Rand Paul needs to do is he can talk forever for 14 hours, and then he can just tag Ted Cruz, and he can talk for 14 hours. Yeah. And they can keep on doing it forever if they want.
Can.
And that's
I keep warning you, literally forever.
I know. But, and the only way you can stop it is with 60 votes.
Yes, yeah.
But if you simply reverse it to say they need 40 votes to keep the filibuster going, and whenever they don't have the 41st vote, it ends, regardless of whether they talk or not, that changes everything. It's still 60 versus 40. That doesn't change that. But requiring 41.
Not thought about this at all.
Yeah,
I have to admit.
Yeah,
I've got no response to this
well, it's devilish.
Yeah,
but it's not like I came up with this. There's people talk about this a lot. Well, not a lot. Wonks talk about this sometimes. But requiring 41 votes to keep it going rather than 60 votes to end it means that.
This does sound like something that Ezra Klein would get really excited about.
with a good reason. It means that at 4 a.m., rather than requiring Rand Paul there, one person with however many... you need at least 49 Democrats. Because if you don't have 49 Democrats, this is another thing that's not appreciated. If you don't have 49 Democrats there, you don't have quorum.
Yeah.
Which means they can take a break. Which means that person doesn't need to be talking all night. They can just take a break until 49 Democrats return, and then they'll continue talking. Yes. So it actually punishes the majority if you have 60 votes and are talking filibuster. If you swap it round and you need 41 votes to keep it going, the 41 Republicans have to be there all night. The Democrats can piss off home. They can sleep. And the Republicans, or they need 10 of them to keep quorum going. And then the Republicans need to keep 41 there at all times. So they are almost always there 24 hours a day until they give up. And if they don't, the moment there's only 40 Republicans, filibuster over.
I think on some level, Chaz, that what you really want to see is the return of sort of physical challenge game shows.
It is a little bit like that, isn't it?
Okay, now in PEP, we only require 50% to break a filibuster. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to break Chaz's talking filibuster now, as great as it is.
That's all right, yeah. High five.
That was with my left hand. That's why it was so unco.
Just to finish it off, because I'm almost there, to say... This week, this was the news. Joe Manchin said he doesn't approve the 41 vote.
Oh.
So the one thing that would make the talking filibuster not suck in exactly the way you predicted is the one thing Joe Manchin said, nah, I'm not going to do that.
I'm so
there you
surprised.
Go. Now, he might change his mind. But if they don't, this little thing that no one cares about, this technical thing that you hadn't heard of and no one gives a stuff about, could be the single thing that just screws up the Senate.
Yeah, therefore it's not going to happen.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
See you
guys.
later. Bye-bye.